Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tech and Soul podcast. I am Tamika Key.
And I am Lindy Johnson.
Oh, yes. And today it's just Lynn and I, no guest. We're going to we're going to remix it back to one of our earlier episodes. Today we're going to talk about events, community, and content, right?
Love it. That's what we do, right?
For those of you who don't know, Lynn and I actually both have sort of extensive event backgrounds, from both just from a perspective of speaking at events, but also producing events. We worked together at Ad Monsters. But then Lynn, you've done events for companies for a lot of media brands, right?
Oh yeah. And then I was also on advisory boards for events. I was on advisory board for South by Southwest for a couple of years, interactive, when interactive was its own thing. I was on the advisory board of BlogHer
Oh,
for
wow.
a couple of years. So yeah, and both of those things were about bringing diversity more to the stage,
Mm.
like to the stages in many cases, right? But also at Advertising Research Foundation, which you are now affiliated with, I did I did put together a lot of like social media workshops and events, and also like collaborated with things like Social Media Week and Internet Week and all those kinds of good things. That's what I did, a lot of events. And I mean, at other places, I did like meetups or did like groups, like brought together like what was it? Oh, when Android first came out, I launched one of the first Android developer groups in
Wow.
New York City, when I was at Fast Company.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've done events at like all kinds of levels, right? And then, in other prior lives as well, things around like spoken word and stuff like that. So, but in our field, I would say most of the stuff I did at Advertising Research Foundation, and you're raising your thumb.
I
At
didn't do that. I did. It's the. I don't know if anybody else is. If you're watching this on YouTube, there's the problem.
when I raise my hand, stuff happens. I
See, but
don't,
now I didn't do it, right?
right?
It's very weird, and I imagine it's probably because it doesn't know how to recognize Black people, but that's a segue. Um,
But
yeah,
I spoke at an event where a place you used to work. Didn't you used to work at Media Bistro at one point, or work with
I
them?
worked at Media Post. I worked at Paid Content. I worked at Media Bistro. I was a Media Bistro analyst when Media Bistro had launched this a subscription research service called Social Times Pro. It's so funny. I actually I chatted earlier this week with Debbie Williamson, who was the former head analyst for social media for eMarketer. She's been a social media analyst for years, and she just left and has her own analyst consultancy. And I remember talking to her and I was like, oh my God, this is at this point, this is like 2010. So that's 14 years ago. I'd written a research paper on on virtual currencies in yeah, on virtual currencies
I'm
in
sitting down for this one. Go ahead.
virtual currencies, and this is 2010. This was back when all the games, the social games like Farmville and Mafia Wars and all of those things, you remember that you could actually get coins and things in those games. And so we'd done some research around, we tried to produce some of the first research around the size of the virtual goods market. And I talked to Debbie Williamson as one of the analysts in my research. And so it's one of those things where it's like the cycles of how our and the trends and the things that catch the way that companies want to monetize, the way that platforms want to monetize kind of come in cycles. I think it's always advertising first, right? Like that's one of the first ways. But then at a certain point, companies figure, hey, let's actually get money directly from our users. And how can we do that? Like I mean, I think of micropayments that some publishers started to try to, you pay X number of percentage coins for an article. Anyway, virtual currencies and social currencies at the time were one of those things. But yeah, so I did virtual and in-person events for Media Bistro. We actually had at the time we had a social times pro, like a workshop in terms of how to use different platforms and tools for your business. I think I did a workshop on Twitter at the time, among other things. I talked to people about how Pinterest worked. And then probably the kind of two biggest events jobs that I worked at were DigiDay, where, you know, we were doing 7 events a year on a shoestring budget at the time. And then the ad tech, expo and trade show that also no longer exists. And so I would definitely say I kind of cut my teeth on those events and learned about how to produce and curate content and find speakers and kind of strike that balance from a sponsorship and from a sponsored content and let's call it organic or earned content perspective. And I feel like
Gotcha.
that's something that events always struggle with, because you have to pay the bills and sponsors are there to pay the bills.
But some of that sponsored content be booty.
Oh, yeah, it does, right?
I'm gonna keep it real. No, I mean, from the sense of, like you said, you have to pay the bills. And for them, they're doing it to feature their products in some way in front of an audience that, they're hoping will want their products.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, in many cases, when I've seen different sponsored sessions, if it's too pitchy, too salesy, and it's not enough educational, like it's not like, show me how to use your product. Maybe
Right.
that would be more helpful, right? Or even, go ahead, go there.
Well, I think it's a challenge though, right? Because it was one of the things that we struggled with ad tech, the expo portion, because how do you show people how your dashboard works? How do you show people, and this is also, again, 14 years ago, how do you show people how your SSP targets and serves ads on inventory? How do you do that?
Right, but a good way to deal with that is bring a customer along.
Yes, of course.
And let a customer
talk
tell
about
us.
the experience 100%, which we always, and then there's also the challenge of brands never wanting to get up on stage and talk about anything, right? Because and so there's that push and pull. But the reason we wanted to talk about this today was you and I both actually are just fresh off the heels of some events, right? This week, you were at CTV Connect. I'd love to know what your experience was like, what some of the conversations that came up. And then before that, you were at this pub forum for spring, right? In Austin, which I'm sure was a thing. And then myself, I was at the Beat Retreat in San Juan and some of the learnings that came from that. So we're kind of just wanted to chop it up, from an event standpoint. Were there any sponsored content versus non-sponsored content aside? Because that's a separate conversation, which we can have. But were there any themes or ideas or topics that came up at CTV Connect this week, for example, that stuck out to you?
Yeah, I mean, CTV Connect I was only there for the day one, which was a half day. And to be quite honest, it was a sponsor who really had me engaged.
Oh,
yes, it was Cargo.
mm.
And Cargo, what is his name again? I can't think of his name. I should know his name. I met him several times, but I'm always doing this on our podcast.
Harry Cargman.
I think so.
Harry Cargman. He's a founder, but anyway.
He's the guy. Yeah, the guy. Yeah. I'm always forgetting people's names. I don't know what's happening with me. I'm like, really.
So many people.
Yeah, I meet so many people, but I'm really in auntie stages too, but yeah, so speaking of examples, it was like CTV ads are not meant to be like linear ads, right? Like you can have more interactivity with it, right? Because yes, a lot of people are watching CTV from, the sit down back on the couch situation, but many people are watching CTV on their devices on the go, right? Or even if they are watching it in the living room, they're using the other device. Like people are, we talk about, what do you guys call that? It's the second screen, right?
I don't call it the second screen, but I'm gonna let you continue down that rabbit hole.
All right. On your secondary device, you can be doing things. You're capturing You're multi-screen. That's,
multi-screen, right? Not
yeah,
secondary screen, because sometimes the phone is the first screen.
it's the
The
first screen,
TV
right?
is the second one.
Right, like,
I mean, or worst case in my house, the worst is I'll have my phone, I'll have my laptop, and then the TV is also on the on the wall.
right, so, right, me at my house, I don't even have an official TV because I'm happy to use the computer or the iPad or the phone. I did used to have a projector where I would project that stuff, but anyway, the point is you're using multi-screens, right? So, and you can be a little more interactive with CTV. So he was just showing examples of like the QR code usage, right? Or just like how stripping down certain elements from an ad. He also showed like the first ad ever. And I think it was a Boulevard. Not
Oh,
Boulevard.
Belova, like the
Yeah,
watch?
yes. It was a watch commercial and it was black and white. I think what was the year? 48, maybe something like that. And all that ad was it showed like a watch face and it, with the uh, and I don't even remember what those things are anymore since digital
Arm?
watches. What do we call it? An
Arm?
arm. I was gonna say arm. I was like, it's so digital now. I don't even remember what that. I remember they used to teach us how to tell time in
Time in
kindergarten.
class, right?
Yeah, I don't even remember what that stuff was. But anyway, um, the he showed that ad, and all it did was make a bing. That's it, just a sound, right? That's it. There was no words, there was nothing, right? Then he also showed the first Apple ad, right? So he kind of like showed a history of
The
advertising,
evolution
the
of mobile
evolution of,
advertising.
he didn't show, yeah, so kind of in a way, right? Because he showed an evolution of advertising in general. Um, because more than coming into how CTV ads can just be more interactive, right? How you can show, like, I don't know, do you use Amazon Prime?
I do.
Okay, do you know how when you're, oh, Amazon Prime Video.
Yes.
Okay, so you know how when you're watching video and the little IMDb stuff
Yep.
pops up, right? Or even so he was showing how, like, say like you're watching Home Alone, right? The product placement can be in there and it can interactively show you like, here's, I don't know, here's whatever product, and the person can click on that, right? Like, so just showing the interactivity of CTV ads, that CTV ads are not like what linear was, right? That it's just, there's more interactivity. That was very interesting to me. Also, was interesting to me was the opening keynote, and it was between Sarah Fisher and I
From
wish I would.
Axios? From
Yeah,
Axios?
Sarah Fisher from Axios, and his name was Rob, but
I can look it up.
okay. His name was Rob. I tweeted about this. I should know. I'm looking on my timeline right now to see what I tweeted about.
Yeah, hold on
So
a second.
anyway, what was interesting to me? Oh, it's Rich from Lightshed. Sorry. I said Rob. What was interesting to me about his conversation was that, Amazon, YouTube, and Netflix are the leaders right now. And they are the ones to beat, right? And the people who can't beat them are consolidating, are partnering in many ways, right? And he even offered up, well, he didn't say it, he questioned, will Paramount Plus be here in a couple of years, right? Because he talked about how much money it's costing companies like Disney or Paramount. Although Disney has, Disney, Hulu, ESPN, that whole thing, right? But just how much it's costing them to do streaming, right? Like the cost of doing streaming, and where the advertising is not yet at the level to offset those costs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's interesting because there's a lot of what we talk about in the day job at Sim, among other things. There's also a lot of what came up during Beat Retreat. I would say a couple of things. One, there's a lot of speculation about traditional media companies, and let's call them traditional media conglomerates, because they own, because Paramount is not just Paramount. Paramount is Viacom and all of these other entities that are kind of wrapped up in there.
For sure.
So you have a couple of pressures, right? Like you have the pressure for them to appease shareholders, which is its own thing, right? Which is its own thing. If they're a private company, though, they don't have to appease shareholders and they can flex a little bit. So that's a thing. There's a couple of pressures, though, right? So there's the need to feed Wall Street's growth. There is, but there's also the fact that sort of people are not watching TV in the same way that they were before. They still want Paramount content, but they don't want Paramount content through the same distribution channels that they got it before. So I don't think it's a question of whether these media companies can continue to provide streaming. I think it's whether they provide streaming themselves or whether they are consolidated in some way in a Hulu or for example, how Disney and I think a bunch of the companies are actually coming together to do a sports offering, right? Because there is something to be said for the audience is still consuming content, it's just where and how. And so I think that, I mean, that some of that speculation is valid. Like, are these companies burning through so much cash that they're not going to exist? I'm sure some of them will have to consolidate. They've all laid off lots of people, but I think what's interesting is that it's almost like the same analogy of when people first started going from the web to mobile and the famous Mary Meeker presentations where
Every
is
year.
Mary Meeker now? But
I haven't seen her report in the
didn't do
minutes,
anything in a while. The famous Mary Meeker presentations, though, right, where she'd showed this is traffic on the web and this is traffic on mobile. And like, this is monetization on the web and this is monetization on mobile. And are we ever going to close that gap? I think that gap never closed. And I think what we may find with sort of the transition from, let's call it traditional TV to whatever this new iteration of TV, of video that we're in, I think that no, I don't think that these media companies are going to make the same amount of money that they made in the past. Part of it is because of the fragmentation. Part of it is because there are different players taking bigger portions of the money. Let's not forget a couple of episodes ago where we talked about where all of the digital ad spend was going to, like,
right?
companies.
Right,
And
right.
so,
But that's what I said, like Amazon, YouTube,
yeah. And so
and Netflix.
yes.
In this
And then,
case.
I mean, and then you look at somebody like a Walmart seeking to acquire Vizio,
Right.
and what happens when they get in the space. And so I think what was interesting at Beat Retreat, something connected to what you said, was there was kind of this debate about CTV and OTT, and because nobody says OTT anymore, if you think about it, but CTV, and people are like, why are we even calling it CTV? Why don't we just call it streaming? Why don't we just call it video? Because at this point, does it matter? Does the distribution point matter? Is the content that people are is that what matters? And
Right.
yes, you talk about the distribution the distribution matters from how do we serve ads? How do we track engagement? How do we reconcile whether someone should pay for an ad being shown or served? Yes, but the distribution doesn't matter to the consumer. I want to watch what I want to watch, regardless of device.
When I want to watch it, right?
And so I think that's an industry thing that we kind of struggle with. One of the other things that came up at Beat Retreat, though, was this conversation. So it was very much focused on kind of two specific buckets of content. One was all about video, whether it's streaming, whether it was identity, it was how do you measure, all of the things wrapped up in there. The other was retail media and commerce. and sort of how
I got
retail
something for
media,
you there
how
too.
retail media and commerce enable things. And my last panel that I moderated, one of the, actually it's the second to last, but one of the closing panels that I moderated was around shoppable video and sort of where and how we are from a shoppable video standpoint. The first question I asked all of our panelists was, when's the last, in the past 6 to 12 months, have you actually bought something from a video that you saw? And if so, what was it? All of the I had 4 panelists. All of the panelists had bought something within this past 6 to 12 months. One of them had bought it on his mobile phone because he clicked and it sent him, he took a screenshot and it sent him a link on his phone. It sent him a text so he could buy that. Everybody else, it was Instagram, right? Everybody else, it was, they bought video through, they bought something that they'd seen in an Instagram ad, in an Instagram video ad, clicked, connected it in the same. And so I'm going back to the interactivity thing though, because one of the questions that I asked them was, do you want your TV ads? Do you want when you're sitting back and watching something in chill, lean back mode, do you want an interactive ad? Do you want the ad to tell you to do something? And if so, how does it tell you to do that with your TV remote?
Right.
Like,
right.
what is the connection to all of those things, right? And
Right.
so I think I agree with the cargo idea that yes, TV, I think video ads need to evolve. We definitely don't just need to have these 30-second spots, even worse, like multiple 30-second spots in a row that are super boring. But do they need to be more intrusive? Do we want average? We're all trying to avoid ads as it is, which is the worst part. This is the industry that we're in. Like,
but this is the other thing that came up with retail and CTV. We have the opportunity to get better at targeting.
Yeah.
Now, does that become more creep factor? Or does that just become better for advertising overall? Because I'm seeing the ads I want to see. Like to your example of people who bought stuff through Instagram. Typically, that's because you're seeing the stuff that you're interested in through Instagram.
Or not, or not, or you're seeing the weird foreign knockoffs of the things that you're actually interested in, which is its own whole issue, right? Of the whole sort of thing of these scammy companies. And I think so it's interesting because Instagram is so targeted, and because it is such an impulse driven buy, and because it's easy, you've gotten this, and maybe this is a whole separate episode, there's a whole rise of all of these kind of copycat, these basically these pop-up retail companies that steal people's pictures of gorgeous apparel or trinkets or stuffed animals, set up a pop-up shop instantly, run a bunch of ads to get views, people buy these things, and then the shop shuts down, which is a separate thing. But I mean, again, that's a tangent. I don't know. I think there's creep factor.
That is a tangent. You took us somewhere else. Go ahead.
This is a whole tangent. Come back to the creep factor. I don't know. I have to admit that I don't know if I can validly say what's creep factor or not, because I've been in this industry for so long, right? I don't know if I've drunk the Kool-Aid enough to be like, relevant ads are better. Do I want to see, now that I have the option of turning cookies off, which I often do, the ads are terrible and generic, right? The ads are terrible and generic. Again, Instagram works because Instagram has all of this information about me, and it's able to serve me ads that are extremely compelling. I think if done correctly, and I use this example a lot, I think Kroger, which owns Ralph's, has done a really great job of respecting consumer privacy while also building incredibly rich and in-depth profiles. I tell the story of how I, over a decade, I lived in LA and I moved a number of times. And each time, Ralph's, which is the division of Kroger that has grocery stores in LA, each time, a couple of weeks after I moved, I'd get my little Ralph's bunch of coupons in the mail. And somehow they knew my new address, right? But they always served me, I was gonna say served me ads, they always delivered coupons that were valuable. They always deliver coupons because they have my purchase. They know exactly what I buy. They know literally when I switched my brand of soy milk, they know and started sending me the different ones. They know sometimes I like Simply Orange Juice and they send me free things for Simply Orange Juice. Creepy? Possibly, but it was extremely valuable to me. And so it never creeped me out. So I don't know if it's because they didn't do it in an intrusive way. I don't know if it's because they used the data because they were providing a very clear, tangible value, or maybe it took long enough to not send, but it did not feel creepy. I don't know if we can figure out how to do that for users that, one, are not in our industry, two, maybe companies that don't have as vested an interest in that relationship like a Kroger.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I mean, so I was getting ready to say, we had a publisher forum.
Yeah.
We had someone from the IAB, Jeffrey Bustos.
Oh, yeah.
Try to butcher his middle name, Bustos, but he has a middle name that's very, yeah, I'm not butchering it. And Jeffrey Bustos brought Evan from Albertsons.
Evan Havorka.
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you see, I don't want to.
That's who I did my fireside chat with. It's crazy.
Okay, so he's been making the rounds
rounds
because I heard he was at Ramp Up.
He was at Ramp Up. He was at Beat Retreat. He was at
right.
I did it.
So these events are incestuous, to say the least. But yeah, so they were talking about that, right? Like, he was talking about how he needs publishers. Specifically, he was talking to CTV publishers a lot, right? But how he needs publishers to, like, we always talk about retail media closing the loop. He needs publishers to kind of close the loop at all. Or more, I wouldn't say close the loop, but it's more about helping to make sure the content is reaching the right people, right? That it's the right content, right? So I found that interesting as well, to hear, because that was the whole presentation was about. It was like how retail media and CTV are kind of that's the next level of where retail media is going, because offsite, everybody's ready to do offsite. They're like, we know how to do onsite really well. Now we need to figure out offsite, and we need publishers to help us figure it out, because there's also the other thing you talked about, the data and measurement piece.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm distracted because you kept saying offsite, and I'm like offset, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting. One of the other things that came up though was this idea of are we entering a space where it's just a bunch of different little mini walled gardens now,
Yeah.
where it's the Albertsons walled garden, it's the Kroger walled garden, it's the NBCU walled garden, it's the Google walled garden, it's that, right? And so as an advertiser, if you want to do a campaign and reach, let's say, a bunch of African-American women, you need to go to the Kroger walled garden, to the Google walled garden, to this walled garden, to that walled garden, to get your whole audience and target them based on kind of the elements, the data points that each of these companies provide. But does that become expensive, and does that become prohibitive? And then what about the media companies that are not in those gardens? What about the small publishers? What about the indie publishers? What about the people who, so it's interesting.
So Evan was like, I don't want walled gardens. I want social and open web. But social, so many social is walled gardens, right? So
Yeah, and
that's
also as a retail media partner, they have to be very careful about what they do with their user data.
right,
Again, because it comes back to the Kroger example. Ralph's
right,
not give everybody my data and let everybody target me. Ralph's kept my data for whatever reason in a very safe way, and then was able to protect the relationship that it had with me and its brand.
hmm,
On some levels, the fact that it was a walled garden was made it able to create a positive user experience.
right,
But
right.
now we're down in the weeds. I feel like we need to climb ourselves back up, because the focus of this again was well, the focus was whatever, but in terms of the events, what out of the content of the events, because there's the Trinity, right? It's the content, the community, and what was the other one?
It's not commerce? No.
Oh, maybe
Is it commerce? I don't
I
know.
don't know. I don't know. It might be commerce. It might be commerce, but it's like, I think I'm gonna actually, guys, you can't, well, you can see this, but or theoretically you can't. Is the event Trinity? No,
It's not commerce. It's not commerce.
community content and business models, but you were
Right.
close. You were close. So we talked about the content of these events. Any sense of community, or any thoughts on the business models of the events that either you're at, which I don't know if you could talk about your own personal events, or
Yeah, I can't really. That gets tricky. Um,
God.
what I can say, is I think so. I think here's what I think. I think that events have been what they've been, right? Like you mentioned it at the opening. It's we sell some tickets and then we get some sponsors to offset some of the costs, right? And the sponsors take part in numerous ways. They're either exhibiting or they are getting some session time, right? So this has been the model for, I don't know, how long have I been in this industry? Over 20 years. Well, not industry, in media in general, right? Over 20 years. This has been the thing. Like, is there a different way? And is there, I think also too, over the pandemic, we learned something about these virtual events. Like, could more events benefit from having both live and virtual? Like, as another, not enough for doing them. There are many that do, but there are also many that still don't. But from a monetization standpoint, does it make sense? I could not travel to Florida or Austin or Vail or whatever other place that events are happening right now, but I could afford 250, 300
Well,
to
I think you
virtually.
have to determine what that $250 or $300 is worth, right? How do you create an experience? How do you create a virtual experience for your attendees that delivers $250 worth of value, right? Are there separate, and we kind of tried to work with some of this with App Monsters, right? But are there separate virtual networking areas, right? Because a huge part of the events is actually being together and being in person and having these spontaneous conversations. And so
Yes.
if you have a virtual component, do you create a virtual networking component? Do you create these serendipitous opportunities for two people on different sides of the world to connect over something? Do you have these like little mini speed dating sessions where it's like, hey, look, you know, I saw some clips from Beeler Tech's Basecamp event, I think. And I think it was Scott Messer. He posted a picture of his badge. And I loved what they had on the badge. I think it was like his likes. right? So it was like the person's
Oh,
name
that's
plus like
cool.
3 things that they like. So I mean, what if, you know, the virtual event had, you know, there's the networking break that's happening in person. But then you also have for your virtual attendees, you put them in a virtual, you know, a little virtual room. And it's like, these are the 3 things you listed on your profile that you like. Why do you like them? You know, or like, these are one of the things you have to talk about: your favorite food, your favorite, you know, music genre, and like your favorite city to visit. And then it's like, why are these, and again, separate from the work content, but like this opportunity to let people connect. I think virtual components of events can definitely add value. I think they just have to feel like not an afterthought, and not
Right.
just like, hey, I'm just gonna let you live stream and watch it, because that's not worth $250. Maybe that's worth 100.
No,
Maybe
no,
that's
but
worth, right. But you know,
but that but that's the thing. There were platforms born of the pandemic
where them
that
platforms at now? Sorry. What
where the
about
platforms at now? Where they at now? Where they at?
what
Where
happened
they
to
at?
Clubhouse? What happened to Clubhouse? Clubhouse was the best. It was supposed to be like the best thing ever. And then, but like, what happened? I think there's something, the thing with events is there is something about tangibly getting together with people. Yes, virtual events are amazing and can be useful, but yes, virtual events can be useful, but yeah, there's construction happening in my house right now. It's a whole thing. But I think you do have to make sure that um that that you create situations that users that your virtual users can benefit from. I think we might be at time. I think we might be at time. Where did the time go? Are you on mute? You're on mute now.
I was,
Yeah.
but how is that possible? That's impossible.
It's impossible. You know, our episodes are quick and dirty, especially
They're
unless we
quick
have
and
guests.
short. But okay, so what would be our takeaways from folks from that? Because yeah, we haven't done that kind of thing. What would be our takeaways
From this episode?
from this episode? What would you say?
Gosh, one, I would say, I think, you know, the model for video is still evolving, and what remains to be seen is whether the big media companies that have dominated the past 20 years have what it takes to evolve alongside their audiences. That's one. What would be number 2 for you?
Evolution is definitely the thing. I think also for me, it's that we need to look at the past to kind of think about the future. Like, I like when you talked about, remember when mobile came along, right? I really think that part of what we highlighted in this conversation in terms of events or in terms of CTV, right? Is that we have to study our history to understand our future, right? And that's a big problem with education right now in general, which I could go off on a tangent.
That's for the next. And then
Right?
I think the third point would be, again, it's events are unique. Virtual or live, they're unique, and you have to create value for everyone in attendance, including your sponsors, right? Your sponsors have to have a reason to be there. Your attendees have to have a reason to be there. Your speakers have to have a reason to be there. So it's all about kind of creating that value.
Right. User experience. That's something we all talk about, right? Wait, subscribe. This is YouTube.
Oh my God. Yes.
Subscribe.
Hit that subscribe button. And also, if you found our conversation interesting, and if you are possibly interested, if you think your company might be an interesting potential sponsor or vendor for the Tech and Soul podcast, please get in touch. Our info is techandsoulpod@gmail.com. You can find Lynn on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. But otherwise, we'll definitely say, we'll see you next time.
See you next time.